So, 32 weeks to go, and here I am in the sunshine with the Venture. This is the full-size Venture, which I didn't actually ever film on this Venture due to reasons associated with seasickness. But there were many different Ventures in the movie. I got to shoot on the full-size set that we had in the parking lot.
Very busy and chaotic tonight. There's partial Ventures in the sense that there was the full upper deck built at Stone Street Studios, and then of course all the cabins and holds and so forth. And then in terms of the entire ship, there's three. There's the full-size ship, which is built from a little coaster called the Manuia. Then there's our 12th scale model here, and then there's a tiny little one that we're using for extreme long shots.
And at the moment we're shooting the miniature Venture, a wonderful, incredibly detailed miniature that Weta Workshop have made, and Alex Funky and his great team are busy shooting the miniature ship on the stage.
Well, you always want to use the right tool for the job. If you want to do a shot of the Venture steaming into the sunrise, it'd be great if you could simply take a full-size ship out and steam it into the sunrise and film it from a helicopter. But if you have to have a ship in a storm, if you have to have a ship that's in danger, that's in extreme waves and so forth, well, that's very hard to film and very dangerous. It's much more practical to do that on a miniature, which is how our 12th scale miniature comes into play.
Our miniature at 12 scale is 14 foot long. Some of the storyboarded shots go extremely close to the surface of it, and therefore it has to be an extremely detailed model.
There are miniatures in the world that get built. Okay, 2.5 hours, I got to mount 800 rivets on this boat and then I can go home. Those are the miniatures that don't work. The miniatures that work are the ones where everything that's done was done by somebody who had a story to tell. What's the last time that they washed the deck? What was on the deck at that time? Was it animal droppings? Was it rust? Why are these rivets rustier than those? Because water trickles down off the lifeboat davit and runs on this post, so there's more water here, so it rusts more. But that's the kind of thinking that makes a good miniature builder.
One of the coolest things that bring miniatures to life is the lighting on them.
On the miniature Venture, we've got all the lights that were on the real Venture, all the bulkhead lights and the spotlights and the running lights and so forth. But we want to keep those as a separate piece of film. That's because we need to be able to, when we put the shot together, adjust the brightness relatively of all these different components. So that gets a piece of film that's just black except for just those little points of light, portholes and everything else. Here's a practical, one of the little scale practical lights. It's a waterproof bulkhead fixture. But as you see, it doesn't do much. But, okay, turn that on, please. We have an effects light which creates the glow that surrounds the lamp. So see, that way the two together produce the total effect. As with anything else in miniature photography, it's all cheating. It's all faking something so that it looks the way it does in the real world.
One of the tricky things with a miniature ship is not just making the ship look good and lighting it and shooting it. You've actually got to have the ship moving. It's one of those things that if it's not moving properly, you're going to notice it. It's going to give away the whole trick.
In the course of working out the ship's movement, a great deal of study was done by the digital guys and by our guys as well, looking at lots and lots of documentary footage of ships in different kinds of seas to look at things like how many degrees per second does a ship in a moderate sea roll.
So by using a very simple counterweight process, we can find the waterline of the model and mount the axis point through the waterline. And then as you can see here, just with the slightest of touches, I can actually get the ship rocking.
The three motions that a ship has are pitch, which is to say rising and falling the bow and the stern, yaw, which is turning, and roll, which is motion from side to side. So we need to have all three of those motions in this ship.
The only thing we can't do is vertical raise and lower, and they'll achieve that by using the camera. So hopefully next time you see it, it will be bobbing around in the ocean just off Skull Island. And if these people have done their jobs right, there hopefully won't be any way you can tell it apart from the real ship. So it's certainly a very, very enjoyable opportunity that Kong has offered us building this ship.
When we did the sums on how many miniatures there were to shoot on the film, we suddenly realised that we could be filming for another year after the film came out. So we quickly decided that we needed another miniature unit to help support Alex's team, and that new team is what we call BVH's unit, which is Brian Van Hul's unit.
During the course of the live action shoot, I was the visual effects supervisor on set, and then during post-production, whatever they need done, I usually end up having to do it, whether it's visual effects elements. Okay, we'll do that again, Dave. Or, like right now, they wanted to start a second miniature unit. They put me in charge of that unit so that I can work with Alex Funky and we can try to get through all of the material in the short amount of time we have. It's Friday. Friday's easy day.
The producers talked about the number of shots that needed to be achieved to finish the show, and we were talking about 800 shots that we actually had to shoot, and whether or not we will achieve it, I don't know, but we will have a damn good go at it.
It's a very fast unit. They shoot miniatures like crazy. Up to 20,000 feet of film in one day on one camera is quite a feat on miniatures, and they did it.
V-track back into where we had that original position.
Rolling, and Mocon is moving.
The different passes that we'll shoot on our miniatures are a standard move length, which matches the previs cut that Peter's given to us. One that's 20% longer, so that once the final animation is finished, if he wants to lengthen the shot, he actually has those frames. We also do those versions with high wind and with low wind, and in some cases with clean atmos and with smoked up stages. You know, Mike, when you think about it, none of this would be possible without the support of cocktail napkin technology. There's all our scaling, there's our count sheet.
We have a number of different studios that we're doing things in, so we have a lot of irons going and a lot of fires.
We've got 2 motion control operators, and I'm sometimes doing 2 shots at once and jumping from one studio to the other. Plus they're shooting other components like smoke and fire elements and things randomly all over the place. So there's a lot of different stuff happening simultaneously.
Brian is a jack of all trades in that he can do anything, but he's one of the few that I know is a master of them all. He's very much like Peter in lots of ways in that he has endless bounds of energy and he wears many a hat on this project.
Oh, I have to because I'm losing my hair. Took fire. You're only really as good as the people who work for you. And we've been really lucky to get a really good collection of people from the live action unit and from the other miniatures unit and also from overseas over to help us create the second miniatures unit. Except for Mike Kelly, he's kind of crap, you know, but we stick with it anyway. Hi. Hey. Gus Hunter and Jeremy Bennett have been really essential in leading us on the actual look of things. We end up with sometimes just a sequence with previs, just black and white images and very nondescript skies and, you know, not a lot of dressing in terms of what the environment should look like. So Gus and Jeremy have been great in coming down, actually doing digi-stills of the miniatures and actually incorporating that into their concept paintings. These lines that are going across, not just having lines going across, but you see that sort of stuff in Gus's artwork. The one thing that always distinguishes the images is how it's used in a film. And that is always in context with how good the director is. There's really incredibly amazing work that people will never see in movies that just have bad stories and poor directing. You never have that problem working on Peter's films because the storytelling is there, the directing is there. So that's really the important thing about working with a good director, and luckily we happen to have one that lives in the neighborhood. So it's just up to us to apply the technology to it to make it look really cool.
So we're about 3 months from the end of miniatures construction. We're working on the approach to Skull Island.
The dynamic environments of Skull Island have been predominantly created through the use of miniatures, and therefore it's great to have an opportunity to show you the journey that a miniature goes through here at the workshop.
We read the script and then you guys can illustrate some sort of more of a feeling of the action from the script.
As is always the case, our design work starts with the script, an initial chat with Peter, but then on to our conceptual designers, Gus and Jeremy, begin creating beautiful artwork that further enhance Peter's vision for the film. Once these are finally approved and we've singled out 1 or 2 paintings that best capture that vision, we then create a 3-dimensional maquette.
Peter said to us, make that painting. So that primarily is what we're doing.
I made this maquette for Peter to look at nearly a year ago.
But it just sits in storage up on the shelves waiting till the schedule is relative to when we should start building it. Its time has now arrived, so the old maquette is pulled out and we begin work on it. We literally slice this little miniature up
to give us the information to build the larger scale model. We scale up either by hand off this model, but in recent times also utilising the previs department to drive our ShotBot, a robotic routing table, which automatically cuts out the profiles.
Once we've got the outline, which is just really bones, we get a skeleton, and we've got to add all the skin and the detail, like this architectural detail, that we've got to just look at the maquette and take measurements and try and recreate in between each profile.
This is the area we're working on right now. It's the floor panels. We're translating that onto the actual model. And after this, we're going to start building the facade of the buildings, which is this area on the maquette right here. It's not going to be as detailed as this, so it's going to be more like cave dwellings.
The guys have created these massive angular rocks, and the feeling that the seismic eruption that's hitting the island is making everything fall out of parallel, and I think we've really captured that in this latest miniature.
We clad rock that we've moulded from real rock around the coastline of Wellington and throughout New Zealand.
We have different names for the different sorts of rock. Probably the easiest one to identify is James Brown here, same for all the grooves that it has in it. Charlie Parker, better known as Bird, and we call it Bird just because it's so goddamn interesting.
Louis Armstrong is smooth with gravelly undertones.
Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk. This is one of the early Rolling Stones.
We skewer it on using meat skewers or shish kebab sticks, and then using urethane foam, we actually foam those rock surfaces on, go back in with a knife, cut pieces out, tilt them, change them, squash them, stretch them, to try and make a more dynamic environment. Then we try and get Peter in to have a look at it. It's a good stage for him to make alterations if he wishes, because it's very simple still to move it around. Very thankfully, in the case of the miniatures for Kong, he's actually had very few changes. He's been very satisfied with where we've taken the miniatures, and it's allowed the process to move ahead at incredible pace. But for me personally, I think the most satisfying thing that I now get out of my job is really watching these exceptionally talented artists create all these neat things. You're working with a group of people that have an unabashed enthusiasm, a passion and a drive to just achieve really great results all of the time, and that's a good place to be.
Hi, welcome to this edition of the Production Diaries. We thought at this point we'd kind of talk a little bit about what the Miniatures art department does and its relationship to the work we're doing here at Miniatures. We have a terrific Miniatures art department, and the man who's really responsible for putting that all together is Paul Van Omen, who's head of the shop.
Shot 7, we're just about at the ledges.
The model is sort of finished at Weta. John Baster and his team, they essentially complete it without dressing.
So this is an undressed set. This is how it comes from Weta. It's partially painted, and we will turn it into something like this. This is an example after a few hours of dressing. Get the model team on it, get the Skull Island look.
The first thing is we get presented with some, perhaps some early conceptual artwork.
We've got to interpret what the production illustrators did. We had a workshop, which in turn reflects Peter's vision of a particular scene, interpret it in a small scale. Then my guys have to come in and work out exactly what the camera's going to see and exactly what has to be hyper-detailed.
Well, the set we're working on here is Anne's Run. We use a lot of live plants, a whole lot of bits and pieces that we can just put in, and they're just sitting outside, and we just go and get them and whack them.
Dangerous twig, probably be used on 3 sets so far.
Or this one that hasn't been used on any.
It's very hard not to walk into somebody's garden, even on a Sunday, when you're and not look at something and go, oh, can we have that?
Welcome to the greenhouse. Oh, see, no, I can't do it.
Oh,
Okay. Well, this fern on a live action set is represented by this one on a 10th scale set.
It works. It's amazing how well it works.
And that's the whole secret, is how do you scale a tree down so that you make a tree that's 1/12 of full size but still has moving leaves and moving branches? How do you do that? How do you scale dirt? How do you scale moss? How do you scale pebbles? That's where the artistry of the model technicians comes in.
We've got about 9 people in the miniatures team who are responsible for all the dressing.
Nicole, Bruce, Simon, Fraser, Kate, Sam, Ivan, Lucy.
We're good at trees, and we're good at vines, and we're exceptionally good at moss.
When we're dressing, one of the crucial layers is the moss. To make it look real and better, like in here, and the contrast between that and that, once you burn it.
Detail, actually. That's one of the things that I really love about model making, is that you're trying to create something which is going to hopefully appear huge, and you've got to fool everyone into thinking it's that big when in fact it might only be this big, and so you've got to put all the right detail into it.
The secret of doing good miniatures is having model technicians that really understand the nature of scale and how to quickly and efficiently create a big environment, let's say like this rocky surface, so that even though the camera's really close to it, it still stands up and looks in your mind's eye exactly like what you expect that moss or that algae or whatever to look like. Those kind of issues, which are the things that make the miniature not be a miniature, but be the real world.
Model making is particularly on King Kong, there's a lot of pleasure in creating the environments.
It can be quite, get your adrenaline going to make sure that you meet the deadline.
It hasn't got boring though.
What do I like about model making? It makes me feel like a kid.
Skull Island, it's your worst nightmare and your greatest dream.
10 weeks to go for us, probably 17 weeks until the film was released, so a lot of stuff to do.
Hi, welcome back to Miniatures. It's about 9 weeks to go until King Kong is in the theaters, but for us it's only about 2 weeks to go because we have to finish shooting all the miniature elements to go to digital for compositing just so we can meet that 9-week deadline. In past episodes, we've showed you how we build the sets and how we dress the sets and how we work with the art direction and stuff. Now we're going to show you how we light them and how we shoot miniatures for King Kong. So let's take a look.
We've got quite a few things going on at the moment in a sort of rush towards the end. We're shooting Central Park, Kong's lair, which is where Kong lives, the spider pit, and another part of that which is called the log chasm.
We've done well over 1,000 shots at this point. When you're shooting miniatures, our goal is always to make everything convincing. Now, one of the things that you notice in a film that doesn't use miniatures is that every shot's pretty much in focus. You're out in the sunlight, you can see things that are near the camera in focus, you can see things that are far away in focus. And the thing that kills most miniature shots that don't work is the fact that stuff in the near ground, stuff near the camera, isn't sharp. In order to get that convincing look that everything's in focus, it means that we have to adjust the lens in such a way that we can keep even the near stuff in focus. It's very, very tricky. Backside of that is that you've got to use a tremendous amount of light when you do that.
One of the things we often have to do is try to replicate the characteristics of sunlight for a particular scene. We try to match what Andrew Lesney, who's the director of photography, who did on the day.
Out in the real world, sun's millions and millions of miles away. If you're dealing with a small source that's that far away, its beams will be parallel, whereas you come in with a big light like a 20K, its beam keeps going out. It doesn't go in straight lines, so your shadows tend to change.
It may not be obvious to you, but there's something wrong. You say, wait a minute, that doesn't look like real sunlight.
What we've been doing is using multiple sources of light so that it looks as though there's a big source and they're all coming from a similar direction.
Then there's another interesting thing we have to deal with. Things that are far away in the real world are not as sharp as things that are up close. Not in terms of focus, but in the fact that you're looking through a lot of air. How do we create a lot of air when the furthest away thing in the miniature is only 50 feet away?
Adding smoke helps create that atmospheric perspective, and seeing that graduation all in one scene, that's the thing that makes you really feel like you have a lot of depth and it feels really big.
So that's focus is critical, the character of the light is critical, and the atmospheric perspective, the diffusion on distant objects is critical. Those are the three keys to making a miniature work and be believable. This is a nice modern Aeroflex 435 camera, which is our good old workhorse. But half the cameras we're using are Mitchells, are made 40 years ago. They're just as good now as they were then. Beautiful production camera for the kind of work that we do.
For most all the shots we do, we rely on motion control equipment.
A motion control package is a camera, a dolly, and a crane that are all controlled by a computer.
We really have to use motion control because we need to do exact repeat pass photography. Having the camera move exactly the same way over and over and over again.
Its relevance in terms of miniatures is
being able to put a scene that was shot in real life up against a scene that was shot in miniatures, and to be able to deal with the scaling of the two shots. It can also mean that Weta Digital, when they are creating the animation of Kong, it's going to line up to what's actually happening in the background. Most of the miniatures we shoot multiple passes because it allows the compositors to actually manipulate the overall shot.
Well, we make sure that we've given them soft key light, hard key light, diffuse light, and so forth, so they can take these different elements and lay them together and produce just about any look they want.
On Rings, Pete had several units all over the North and South Island. But in this case, the entire film was done pretty much right here on the lot. So Pete's been using the miniature units as his location scenic units.
I think it's daring and brave of Peter and to have that confidence in what we're doing to actually put that much of the movie entirely in a miniature environment.
It's been a huge monumental task, but it gives Pete the ultimate control over creating Skull Island.